is give you the screen. So I'm just looking at what I've got to do to share the screen, so bear with me. Maybe I make you a special grand person, so bear with me. Make you a host or co-host or something. So I've just made you a host, so to speak, which I think you can go to the bottom and do some magic. I'll do an introduction. Welcome to country. Knowledge in the country. Ah, that's good. Yes, that's all looking good from this side. So what I'd like to do is just to help people that are online, etc. What we've done earlier is just taken the guests here for a walk through the building, and hopefully that was an enlightening experience. And what we've got is about 12 or so people in the room. I can pan around, but probably doesn't matter too much. And what I'd like to firstly just acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the Kaurna people, and we pay our respects to the elders past and present, and extend the respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. So I'm happy to now, and I am putting on the spot, Odette, because obviously you're not here to meet and greet some of these smiling faces, but I'll do an introduction as far as I can for Odette. So Odette is one of the lead researchers here at SAHMRI, working closely with the Aboriginal communities, and the various work programs that are involved in the work here at SAHMRI is quite diverse. And so from my perspective, I'm not really qualified to actually talk about that. And I'm probably happy for Odette to share some of the work that she's personally involved in, because it's really exciting and interesting work. And and if we've got enough time, and I'm hoping there'll be a chance for people to ask some questions and get some understanding. So just before we do start, Odette, the group that's meeting here today are part of the Anglican Church that are focused on the social justice issues that have arisen from the Statement of the Heart, and a commitment from the Anglican community to say, how do we make a difference in our churches and in the wider community around both a respectful engagement with Indigenous people and a chance for the local communities, being the Anglican community, to sort of partner and work closer with the local Indigenous people. And so that's probably at least a brief introduction as best I can without talking on behalf of everyone. So hopefully that helps at all, Odette, and I'm passing to you now, so to speak.
Thanks, Chris. Yes, that was helpful. And as Chris has already done, he's acknowledged the Kaurna people whose traditional lands we're meeting on today. I'm actually on Zoom. I would have come in, so I do apologise for that. It would have been great to meet face to face, but it's hard in this sort of world to know at the moment which meeting we're meant to be in. So I've just been on a couple of Zooms already today. So I do apologise for not being able to be there in the room with you, but I do say hello. You know, Chris, thanks for the invitation to talk today. We could probably even just start in with the acknowledgement. So I myself am not a Kaurna person. I am Torres Strait Islander and Eastern Yalanji, which is my clan group is obviously Torres Strait Islanders, but then in Daintree up in far north Queensland. So the acknowledgement is important, and you're probably all familiar with an acknowledgement. The reasons, there's several reasons why we do it, but one of the reasons is that the land was never ceded by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And so by acknowledging the ownership of the land by the traditional groups of that land is something that we can do to acknowledge that, give recognition that the land was not actually given up, and that the connections to the land have never been broken, and that it continues to be an important part of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's lives. I will just give you a bit of a background. Chris has already mentioned where I am professionally within SAHMRI. So this is just to give you, just so that you can situate me within the Institute. I work in the Aboriginal Health Equity team. The Institute itself, in its establishment, has always had an Aboriginal theme, and that's quite a unique thing. Most institutes don't have that when they start out. However, it was something that was important to this institute and the people who were making the decisions at the time. They recruited Professor Alex Brown, who has developed the institute, the theme into what it is today. And this is what the theme looks like. It is one of 4 themes in the institute, and for the people that have been on the tour, you would have heard about the themes. So we have Professor Alex Brown, who is a doctor, has a major interest in cardiovascular disease and men's health, one of the leading researchers globally in this space. Then we have platforms, population health, which I lead, health services and systems, led by Kim Laurie, implementation science, led by Natasha Howard, and capacity development, led by Carla Pinuto. And then we have Associate Professor James Ward, who has worked here at the Institute, but also the University of Queensland now. And he's definitely an emerging global figure in the space of sexual health and wellbeing. Our unit, or our theme, has probably about 45 to 50 staff, so it's quite a big research unit or team, and within each of those platforms we have a lot of projects, and we have about half of our staff are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. So we have the Aboriginal leadership through Alex, and then 3 of our 4 platform leads are Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander, and James as well. So when Alex was first recruited to South Australia, so Alex is actually also from another state, he's from New South Wales. One of the things that he did was to start engaging or start having conversations with the community. And he wanted to connect with the community to understand what their sort of perspectives of research were, you know, what the value of research was for Aboriginal people in South Australia, what their experience of research was, and also what their priorities were for research. This was going to be, at the time, the first sort of, I guess, Aboriginal research unit to lead research in South Australia as well. Even though there were 3 universities, Aboriginal research wasn't really a major sort of core component of any of those 3 universities. That was back in 2013. So he had held a forum that several of us were at, the original staff, and at that forum, there were really frank discussions. There were Aboriginal community members, there were Aboriginal organisations, there were academics, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, and there were frank discussions about, you know, the way in which research had been done and benefits of research for the Aboriginal communities so far. And it wasn't a good track record. So we then said, right, okay, well, what is it that we need to be able to do to make sure that as a research institute, we are doing research the right way? And that's what I'm going to talk about today, is the guiding principles for how we do our work. These principles have come from consultation with the Aboriginal community in South Australia. They've come from consultation with different Aboriginal organisations across South Australia, not just health organisations. They have come from consultation with key stakeholders such as the 3 universities, the South Australian Department for Health and the Aboriginal Health Council of South Australia. There was also an international literature review conducted to inform these principles. The literature we were interested in was from countries that have had similar experience, or their Indigenous peoples have had similar experiences to us. And so New Zealand, Canada, and the US. And we also looked at ethical guidelines. So all of those bits of information were sort of aggregated up into themes, and these principles are actually those themes. So when Chris and I, well, Chris, we started talking about, you know, the presentation, and as much as these principles are related to Aboriginal health research, you may find that they're sort of some of them are foundational principles that can be used across sort of many things. And because they're principles, they allow and they enable conversations to be held with different communities, with different groups. So the way in which they're implemented will be different in different contexts, if that makes sense. So they're by no means prescriptive in that this is how you do this. It's actually about going, okay, well, let's have a conversation about involvement, which is one of the principles. How would you like to be involved in what we do? How can we work together? So I'm just going to go through each of the principles and provide some examples of how we're implementing those principles across some of the work that we're doing.
Thank you.
So these are the principles. We've got priorities, partnerships, control, ownership, reciprocity, respect, knowledge translation, involvement, and communication. So priorities. So this is really in research, and I'll use research as the example because that's obviously my background. In research, there's been a history of research being directed by individual interests of the researcher, or the research group, or the government, or the funder. They don't always align with the priorities of the Aboriginal community, or any community for that matter. So one of the things that came up strongly was that for us to benefit from research as a community, the priorities for research need to be identified with us or by us. And so one of the priorities was determined, or many priorities were actually determined at that initial workshop that I talked about. And one of them was we want the research to be done the right way. And so that led to the development of the report. There were other priorities that came up, and they informed our program of work. So when we think about, you know, oh, well, I think that this is a good idea, or I think that this is a need, it's really about, okay, let's ask community members, let's ask you know, the people, let's get the voice or the input from the people about what the priorities are and how we might go about addressing those priorities. Partnerships. Again, research was usually done on people or to people and not with people. So in our research, relationships, and we create and sustain partnerships that we're doing research with. This example here is create. When we put this application in for funding, we didn't actually have all these categories identified. We said these categories would be identified in partnership with the community, and we would work in partnership with the Aboriginal Community Controlled Health organisations to be able to provide the evidence that they require. And so that was a very different approach and quite a foreign approach for a funding body to fund something that they didn't really know what they were funding, but it worked. But basically, this group ended up becoming a national group that came together over 5 years, several times a year, and they worked in partnership with us. We worked in partnership with the service to create evidence around the things that they had identified: governance, best practice, sustainable funding models. And so that's one of the ways in which we've been able to hold a group working with us along that research journey, which is quite a long time for 5 years, and it's quite a large group. So we really do need those long-standing relationships, and these relationships were built prior to some of the work that we've done previously to SAHMRI. So individuals brought those relationships into this work, those partnerships, and we built on those. And some of them were new relationships that we built a partnership with over time. And we're continuing to work with many of these stakeholders in new projects. Involvement. All of our research involves governance of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander governance. And so what that means is that strategically we have guidance from a lived experience perspective, as well as a cultural perspective and a contextual perspective. So it's not just research, us as a research group sort of making the high level decisions, but it's actually having a smaller group that's sort of reflective of the research that we're doing. So For example, the Heart and Stroke Plan, this included a whole range of elders that had lived experience in heart and stroke, and likewise with the cancer group. That involvement also keeps us accountable, and that can be quite a challenge at times, but it's the results that you get from having Aboriginal people involved in decision making at a high level is much more rewarding, and the outcomes are greater. Ownership with research, we usually hold a lot of data, we generate that. So there's been a long history of Aboriginal people's knowledges being utilised and never recognised. And so we talk about ownership, and we talk about ensuring that Aboriginal people's information is actually returned to them, made accessible to them, so that they can use, or we can use that information to inform decisions. At a very basic level, if we think about, say for example, in this project, we've got hospital data, you know, people in communities to be able to access what are sort of rates of hospitalisations and reasons for hospitalisation in their community, then they can start to actually work with the health services. They can be more informed about what some of the priorities might be that sort of supplements or complements their lived experience and knowledge. So this project actually involves making accessible probably about 13 or 14 administrative, survey and census data sets to 18 areas across South Australia that we call landscapes, so that they can use the information for self-determination and to monitor changes over time. So groups that have this include traditional owner groups, some of the community control health services, then there might be women's groups, elders groups, and we work with them on the use of this information for advocacy.
Odette, I might just ask, the sound is wavering and going in and out. Are you happy to turn the video off, and hopefully that'll maximise the voice coming through?
I might be able to put these in, might help.
All right, thank you. Not yet. A bit scratchy.
Do you want me to turn the video off?
No. Everyone's happy. Beautiful.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. That's good.
Shall I keep going?
Lovely. Lovely.
Can you start again?
Want me to start again?
No, ready, Jake.
Okay. Well, you've got it recorded, so
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Okay, where was I? So reciprocity. So reciprocity, we're talking about like a two-way delivery of tangible benefits. So as researchers, there is a power imbalance, and so it's quite easy for us to benefit from research as researchers. One, we're employed. Two, we have, you know, track records, etc., etc. Whereas communities, we work with the communities at the beginning of the project, or with groups of the advisory group, to identify what tangible benefits there will be for the community, and they're defined by the community or by advisory groups. So, for example, with this project, the rheumatic heart disease project led by Alex, the project itself was delivering a service. There were actually children diagnosed with rheumatic heart disease that hadn't been, and of all of the participants, they were all checked, got the necessary referrals that they required, and they've also got ongoing care. So we developed an agreement with the local services that would continue beyond the life of the research. Communication. So this one might kind of seem like a pretty easy one, but it's actually, it's not as easy as it always could be. Or so basically, with the science, there's a lot of things that we come up with. Like, for example, we have a scientific name for a study. When Alex was consulting with community about it, and it was really about diabetes, and so in the end it became, you know, well, why don't you just call it the diabetes study? And so it was like, oh yeah, okay. And so the scientific term compared to the community term, but it is really about communication in a way that that is meaningful and respectful to the community. So it's not about dumbing it down, but it's about ensuring that that we are communicating things, and particularly things like consent to participate in a study is quite important. And so what you're seeing on the screen there is some of the information sheets that we would provide people when they're consenting, in that this is what will happen if you consent to participate in the study, so that there's fully informed consent. And that's why the advisory group's really important as well, because they can inform the different types of communication for different groups as well. Control. So this one is really about people having control over what they give to the research. And it's particularly relevant when we're talking about biological sort of samples, or things like photographs, artifacts. One of the studies, which is again the diabetes study, is collecting samples, and so it's about ensuring that participants themselves are able to continue to have control over the samples that they are providing. And from a cultural perspective, there'll be different ways in which those samples need to be managed at different times in people's lives. And so it's ensuring that that control remains with the individual rather than the research group. Respect. This is really in relation to respect for Aboriginal knowledge systems and custodianship of that knowledge. This project here, the wellbeing model, it actually started out as a chronic disease model, and over time, through working in partnership with different services and participants, it became the wellbeing model. And so it was really about respecting the fact that this is the ways in which the community understands health and well-being and has an aspiration for or wants to manage health and well-being, not from a deficit approach, but from an approach of well-being. And so we need to reflect, so it's about listening and then reflecting that in the way, in the delivery of the outcomes for the research. And the final principle is knowledge translation. So this really is about, again, going back to ensuring that Aboriginal people benefit from the research. And so we have a responsibility not just to collect the information and disseminate the results, but to actually follow through to be able to have those results impact something tangible that will hopefully you know, benefit the next generation, if not the current generation. And that's it.
All right, I'll turn our video back on again for you.
Yeah, sure.
At least you get to see somebody in the room. If I can work this out. There we are. So that's wonderful run through of some of the work that you're involved in and some of the other team members in your group are involved in. I'm probably happy to open it for questions. I know the microphone is over here, so it makes it a little bit tricky, but do the best you can if someone would have any questions for Odette or from things that she's brought up this afternoon. Yes, Jeff.
Thanks, Chris. Odette, all this is very exciting to me, and I compare the depth and the width and the involvement of Aboriginal people that you have in this, and in particular the delivering tangible benefits. And I look at the process you're using compared to the closing the gap stuff. It just seems to me that, well, what shows to me is that it can be done, and it can be done very effectively and efficiently. So thank you very much. I go away greatly encouraged by what you're doing here, so thank you.
Thank you.
Ooh.
Do you want me to make a comment?
Yes, Phil. Yes, you're our Jeff. You get the table.
Thank you. I think it was Jeff.
Yes.
Yeah. One of the things that we are moving forward on in the next 5 years is to measure the impact of our research. And so that's a common thing, as Chris would be able to talk to, for researchers to be able to do that. It's not an easy thing. And we actually strive to do that from the perspective of the community. So we measure impact of research from, you know, the number of publications, or there's probably a matrix, I'm sure, but what we want to do, and it goes back to your comment, Jeff, is that I can talk about what we're doing, and yes, we can show that there has been some tangible, maybe direct benefits, and we can probably show that some of our work has influenced policy decisions. But what we can't do at the moment is really understand from the perspective of the community what the impact of our research has been. And so that's something that, you know, like I said, we're looking to do over the next 5 years, with the community obviously informing that that process. And I think that when it comes to closing the gap, all of the work we do would hopefully contribute to that in some way as well.
Hello, Odette. My name's Paula. First of all, thank you for your presentation this afternoon. I think mine's not really a question, it's just an observation. I think the thing that struck me was obviously research takes time, but also putting these principles together and enacting these principles takes a lot of time as well. And so I think the thing that struck me the most is how much time and care has gone not just into the research but into this model, and also using these principles as well.
Yeah. And
you know, I think often people are looking for shortcuts, but I think what I'm struck with by this is you know, these things take time, and so I'm just really impressed with your principle, with the care taken with the principles and in enacting them as well, even aside from your research. So that was just my observation.
Thank you, Paula. Yeah, time is a key word. So the lead people who pulled these together were Kim Morey and Auntie Chris Franks, and they're two very well respected and well connected Aboriginal women in the community. And I think that time definitely, but also people who are well respected and who are accountable. You know, people know them, they've got credibility, and so something like this would be quite difficult, I think, to pull together without that leadership. And as far as time, we've always had a challenge in Aboriginal health research in that the funding, you know, it's gotten better over time, like recently, but it was very much, you know, you need to have it done by this amount of time, you've got to get in, get out, get the results, and that's it. And it's like, well, actually, the diabetes study, which I spoke about, that took 2 years of talking with community, consulting, engaging, developing those relationships, developing trust, before it even went into for a funding agreement. Like, and that is, you know, something that we spend a lot of time doing. And we also have an Indigenous collective, because we have such a large group of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people in the unit. We have an Indigenous collective that's endorsed by the board of SAHMRI, and we have been able to sort of embed these principles in our work, but we also have a lot of we've embedded a lot of things within some of the other like the broader policies in SAHMRI. And so it does take time. Again, that's sort of a little bit different to research, but it takes time to get these principles sort of embedded and in practice. And we have to continually have them sort of front and centre in what we do. We're not experts at it either. So, you know, we come up with challenges as well, and every project is different.
Thank you.
Chris here again, Odette. I know we've got some people online, so if there's anyone that has a particular question for Odette that's not in the room, I'm happy to open it. If not, I'm happy if anyone else has a question for Aboriginal. We've got everyone speechless here.
Lots in all.
No, I do have a question. I'll just bring the microphone over.
While the microphone's going, I have a jeopardy here. Could you, would you have a copy of the model, the principle, please?
So the question from Jeff was just whether we could get a copy of the principles, and I think it's that publication that we had there that brings
Yes.
that up.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
I can give you the publication. Yes.
Thank you. Vivian's going to talk to you now.
I was really interested in what you said about how we often approach Aboriginal health as issues or deficit models. You mentioned the deficit model around well-being. And so these principles clearly address a very different way of approaching Aboriginal health. So my question is a thank you. As I've expressed, the time involved in actually doing this is enormous and can't be accomplished quickly. And I guess part of my question is, how long is it going to be before perhaps governments pick up on this and realise that what they might spend in extra time initially may actually save them a lot of time in the long run with failed programs?
Chris, would you mind, sorry, you were breaking up a little bit there. How long, I think it was about time?
So the question from Vivian, I'll let you repeat it if you want to try again.
That would be great, thanks.
Okay.
Yes, I'm impressed with this model, and also my question is, how long do you think it will be before governments might realise that taking time in these early stages to actually sit and listen and work with the communities might actually be in the long term save them a lot of time and money on failed programs?
Yeah.
The political question to some extent.
Yeah. Very much so. Interesting. So in the Close the Gap report, if you look at the previous reports, I don't think the word partnership or engagement were in those reports. I think that you'll find the priorities were actually set by the government. And so it was the most recent one that they started to talk, and if you see in the front, there's a big thing about, engagement and working in partnership and stuff like that. And then, the agreement sort of came through. So the partnership agreement, I think when you look at the statement of the heart, and if you think about how to make change, you really need what it's calling for. The statement from the heart is a voice at the table. And so that needs to happen. And so if we think about the South Australian Health Department, they now have boards. Each of the LHNs, they now have a board of directors, and they have a position allocated for an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person on that board. Now, that is one of the things that must happen, is that there must be that voice at the table. So, that's a government department. I think it's probably the first time ever that they've probably, I think they've had boards before, Chris, but it's probably the first time they've ever had sort of Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander representation at that highest level. And so it's about getting the voice at all the levels as well for it to be heard. not just, you know, we'll go out and consult with people and sit in the dirt with them. It's actually about, from the very beginning, let's have let's have everybody on the same level with a voice at the table. So I think there's that need for that structural change, because then I think that's when you'll have people who are informed say, well, actually, this is what we need to do first, is we need to understand what the priorities of the community are. You know, rather than, well, let's put these priorities up because we think that's what they are, or that's what they are from our perspective. And then you follow through with, well, how do we address those priorities? You know, in consultation with the people, how do we address those priorities? I don't think that's the answer direct. I mean, I think that is the answer, in that you have to have the right voices at all the levels. And then the time it takes is the time it takes, because it will be guided in the right direction, more so than what it would have been without that voice at the table.
That's wise words, yes. Another question from the floor here for you.
This is Martin, Odette, and you've already got your work cut out with your research, but how much is it, could it be your work to promote those principles and ways of working more widely, or is that somebody else's job that needs to be picked up and promoted?
Yeah, so I should have said at the beginning, I usually do, is that these principles, if we go back to, sorry, I'm flicking through these photos. This photo here, so these principles are endorsed by the 3 universities in South Australia, the South Australian Health Department, the Aboriginal Health Council of South Australia, and SAHMRI. Yeah. So they are actually, we've got quite good coverage, you know, the key stakeholders for the implementation of these principles. And it's interesting you say that, because we're now looking to evaluate the implementation of them. And so we're going to be looking at the research that's been done over the last, since 2014, that's been published, to see if these principles have been implemented in that research. So there's definitely the need for sort of probably more guidance, maybe working more with the 3 groups, or the, you know, with the key stakeholders. We do a lot of presentations. So I've done this presentation just recently to Flinders University, and so we, you know, and it's not just me that's doing them, but as part of our work, we do talk about the principles. But yeah, there's definitely more work we could do, and it's, I mean, as much as it's not our, I mean, sorry, it's not that it's not our job. It's definitely our job. It's also the job of people to actually pick them up and do them as well. Yeah.
That's good. I did take the people past the showcase of the principles in the foyer there on our way through the book. But what you've been able to do is bring that alive for everybody here. So that's really useful as a foundation for them to build on.
Yeah, yeah. And we're going to develop a guidebook, like that sort of does similar to what the presentation did, in give people practical examples of how we've implemented them. So that may help the, you know, different research groups as well.
So I know that the challenge that I've faced personally is how to have researchers adequately engage with the community in a meaningful, positive partnership versus a more expedient, somewhat patronising process. But the elaboration you've given me today is the depth of them and the need to then work closer with the Aboriginal community rather than just even on the more general community members around the research and the detail. So that's been good for me to appreciate from your talk today. So thank you. I'm thinking, I know I did promise you, I'm not sure how your time's going. I might just see again if anyone online has a question, if you'd like to unmute and ask. If not, we'll probably look at wrapping up. So anyone online have anything you'd like to comment on? Essentially. So I'd just like to thank you, Odette, for your time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, and all the best with, you know, with the work that you're doing. I think the most important thing is just to give it a go. We all make mistakes. We all get it wrong. But it, you know, just to, I always start conversations because I'm from a different place as well. So even Aboriginal people with, you know, when I meet people from a different country, like as in a different Aboriginal group, we identify who we are, and that automatically shows that, well, you know, we are different people. We don't do things the same way, and we need to learn from each other. So I always say, you know, like, I don't know whether this is the right thing to say or whether I should be asking these questions or whether I should do this. And most people really appreciate that. And you can just say, look, can I ask you? I don't know. And that's what I say to my colleagues is, you know, let's have the, there's no question that's an awkward question. It's better that you ask me and we can talk about it, and we can support each other through that journey, because it is a lifelong journey and it's a lifelong learning. But the best thing is just that there is no sort of right sort of way or right time to start things. You just have to kind of do it. And I've worked with teams that have never had relationships with Aboriginal communities or done work with Aboriginal communities before, and it's just been so rewarding. Like, there's been challenges, there's been mistakes, but above all, there's been really beautiful relationships developed. There's been, you know, friendships made, and there's been learning both ways that I've seen as well. So yeah, I think it's time that we you know, start to sort of bridge the gap in those sort of relationship making ways as well.
So there's a lot of nods around the room, and you've set the challenge for us, so I'm happy to, on behalf of everyone.
I'd love to hear about it in a year's time, or and happy to present again, Chris, you know, if the opportunity comes up down the track.
All right, that's been wonderful. So
thank you. Enjoy your afternoon.
Thanks, Odette.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
It was wonderful.
I'll let Odette leave us. And
yeah.
Bye-bye. And I know whether people need a comfort break or anything like that, or whether we carry on with the meeting. Yet I'm looking at yourself. Does anyone need a comfort break? No, looks like we're in business, so I'm going to take the microphone over to Wards. And yeah, how's that sound? Yeah.
Okay, there's nothing formal anyway, so.
Stand there, I'll go round so we can- I might have pressed the wrong button. Who said that? Let's just see if I can get back to mission control. Mute. No.
Technology, don't you love it? Sorry about that. Serve me right. I should have been closer on the gap pass. If one of those fails, unplug.
Chris. Now I'm just going to turn the recorder off for those people that can hear me. I'm just going to turn the recorder off and then we'll just resume the discussion. So.